Today is the fourth episode of Crises in the Church, and these are crises that are really shattering to the very existence of the church itself. Times when people would have said, I don't think the old gal is going to make it. You know, Holy Mother Church is just about on her last legs. And this one in particular, we're going to talk about it over the course of the next hour, but it took 39 years for this thing to work out. And so that's one of the things. You go into a history book and you start reading about a crisis in the church, and you come to the conclusion in a page or two, and that's the end of it. Just like when you watch TV, you say you go watch Dr. Zhivago, you know, in 3 hours the whole Russian Revolution is over and done with. Okay, well, in real life, it doesn't work that way. In real life, it goes through days and months and years, and you still have to keep going. And what do you do when there's all these doubts and things that, you know, really shake you to the core? And in this particular, you wonder, if you look at it from a linear standpoint, you wonder as you go through this history, is the church going to make it? Okay, now we know that it did, because this happened, 600 plus years ago, but it really is a dramatic thing in itself at the time, soul searing, and there's a lot of lessons in there for all of us now with what's going on. This one is called, of course, Will the Real Pope Please Stand Up? Dueling Papacies, 1378 to 1417, 39 years. I've got 3 stamps of the papal tiara and Peter's keys here, because at first there were 2 popes competing as to who was the real successor of St. Peter, and then later a third comes into the picture. And so let's see how that all happened. First of all, to give you a little background, this is the gorgeous city of Avignon, and the popes had gone to Avignon in 1305. A lot of reasons why they went. Mostly because Rome, well, there's several good and bad reasons. Rome was in a total state of uproar and shambles. I mean, the law and order was breaking down. It was not a safe place to be. More than that, France, okay, which was the strongest, most populous, most powerful, richest Christian nation on earth, was getting into a real conflict with the Pope, and they actually had forced one of the earlier, Boniface VIII, to leave Rome, okay, to was being driven out. After Boniface died, a successor, Pope Clement, who was indeed a Frenchman, decided, let's just, you know, keep the French happy. Let's move to Avignon, and it was a great. You know, as you can, some of you have been there. No, like Pam, I think has been there. We've been there. It's a great place. I mean, look at it. It's beautiful. It's green, nice weather. It's situated in a kind of a valley, with a beautiful river running through it, a good water supply, everything else. And the popes were going to be here without the risk of, you know, invading. Brigands coming in. You know, there was a law and order. There was a nice piece of land surrounding Avignon that had been donated to the popes, and they bought more land. So it was a very, very nice little enclave, and they loved it there. Okay, and again, they're in what was the most powerful Catholic country in the world, and so they're getting a lot of support. And this is the age of the cathedrals. I mean, people are very, very religious, you know, especially in France. I mean, they're building all this great stuff, and now what they did, what the popes did, is they centralized everything in Avignon. Rome still was there, but Rome was, it was pretty much an area that was there for pilgrims. It had lost, there were all kinds of, they had lost a lot of its population. I mean, the size of the population of Rome had gone in half. Law and order wasn't being maintained because the Pope still ruled the papal states, but it was an absentee rule. And you know what an absentee landlord is like. Not very good. You know, if you got something that needs to be done, they're not going to get it done. And it really caused a breakdown of law and order in all of central Italy. I mentioned the collapse in population, but then there were other effects. The College of Cardinals got to be extremely French. In fact, there were some non-Frenchmen in there, but it was mostly an inside deal. Hey, I've got my cousin or my nephew or a good old boy that I like, and I'm going to make sure that he's in here. And money is pouring into Avignon. Avignon is becoming very rich, and the cardinals are living high in the hog too, and they like it. And again, it's a nice place to live, a nice place to stay. And but yet the idea of being there right at Peter's tomb is getting a little attenuated. You're not at Peter's tomb. You're still the Bishop of Rome if you're the Pope. But it's you're kind of looking a lot more. The popes are French at this time. You're kind of looking more like somebody who's in the pocket of the French king. And so there's a weakening of the spirit of universality. It's one of the great things about the Catholic Church. You can go anywhere, and if they're real Catholics, I mean, they're believing the same thing. They're following the same morality. It's Catholic. And I mentioned the French popes. Now, people started realizing that this wasn't a good situation. For example, the English are disputing with the French as their territories are in France. The 100 Years' War is starting, it's simmering, and the English, who had been famous up to this point for their loyalty to the Holy See, loyalty as Catholics, now we're wondering, should we really be so loyal? This Pope, the French seem to have the market on the papacy. They seem to be very much interested in money. I mean, instead of just the Peter's pence, now they're asking kind of a first-year tributes that are all going to Avignon. And meanwhile, what about us? If we're in Germany or if we're in some other country, what about us? Well, there starts to be a real call for the popes to return to Rome, because he is, after all, the position of being pope is there because you are the Bishop of Rome, the successor of Peter, the Peter's seat. Peter never set foot in Avignon, although he died in Rome. So, in fact, there was even a big rebellion in Rome. The rebellion was led by a guy named Cola di Rienzi, okay? And he was saying that, hey, one of the things that we want back, Rome is going literally to hell. We got to get the Pope back here, because the Pope is what makes Rome an eternal city. And these rebellions are rough. I mean, they're not playing tiddlywinks. Okay, people are getting their hands and chopped off and their heads chopped, and it's very tough. So God actually intervenes. An extremely fascinating, interesting woman, a widow, belongs to the Swedish nobility, and Sweden at the time, of course, was a Catholic country, travels and decides to make a pilgrimage to Rome. Very fascinating lady, a very fascinating person. She had a series of visions of the life of Christ and the life of Our Lady. And one of the things that, in fact, you can read it, her revelations they make excellent and very inspiring reading. One of the things that she mentioned was, the Pope has to come back to Rome. And so she sends a letter to the papal court in Avignon saying, both the Blessed Mother and our Savior Jesus Christ have told me that you really don't belong in France. You really belong in Rome. You're the Bishop of Rome. You should come back. Great harm is occurring to the church because you're not tending your flock. St. Bridget of Sweden. St. Bridget of Sweden, and those of us that were on the pilgrimage, we stayed in her house. Okay, it's now it's a convent for Brigittine nuns. But even though people were very mystically inclined at the time, Rome, whether it's seated in Rome itself or whether it's located somewhere else, like Avignon doing its work, tends to be skeptical. Like we Catholics basically say, we're from Missouri, show us. So where's the proof? I don't know, maybe she's a crackpot, so we're not going to necessarily buy it. Bridget dies, but God's not to be outdone. God sends another person, okay, this person, Saint Catherine of Siena, emissary extraordinaire et mystique, okay. She is really an extremely remarkable person. She is actually, in my opinion, one of the most remarkable persons in all history. She changed the course of history. And the period of time we're talking about, she's basically a kid, okay? She dies a number of years after this particular slide, but she was only 33 when she died. She was a person of tremendous love. I mean, you talk about what love is all about. Read some of Catherine's writings, and you'll see what love is all about. She was ready to do anything and everything for the one that she loved. The one that she loved was Jesus Christ. And that love was not just sitting back and looking at him. That love was talking to him. That love was following him. That love was taking his representations and going with him. That love was spreading him. She spent a lot of time. She was a lay person. Okay, she's dressed in Dominican garb. Okay, the reason why she's dressed in Dominican garb is because she was a tertiary. She belonged to the third order of the Dominicans, the lay Dominican. But her parents, she one of 25 kids. Okay, her parents, and I think she was about 24th. Okay, her parents were very simple people. I mean, they were basically equivalent of dry cleaners. Okay, back at the time, they dyed wool, okay, and she worked with them with the making of the wool and making of the clothes and stuff like that. But she always wanted to dedicate her life entirely to God. Now they didn't want that. They wanted her to get married. Come on, what's the matter with you? You should be getting married. But no, she said, no, I'm giving my life to God, and I don't care what anybody says. And if I have to cut my hair, if pour acid on my face to scare the boyfriends away, I'll do it. Because I want to follow God. She spent a lot of time quietly as a kind of a hermit at home, but the more and more she became in love with God, the more and more people began to seek her counsel. She always had excellent counsel, incredible wisdom, incredible generosity. I can tell you one of the stories about her a little bit later that kind of summarizes exactly what kind of a person she was. And she gets a message, she's frequent apparitions of Christ, frequent dialogues with him, and he said, you have to tell the Pope he's got to come back to Rome. I mean, this is really getting to be a problem in the church. She actually, as a young person, okay, barely 20, in her 20s, she goes to Rome. She's no official person whatsoever. She goes to Avignon. She asks to meet with the Pope, and they said, are you crazy? You can't meet with the Pope. I mean, who are you? I mean, you're nothing, okay? But they do what every good Catholic would think. She's a crackpot. She's got to be a nut. Okay, so let's get her examined by the Inquisition. Okay, so they bring in the Inquisition and they ask her a bunch of questions. And these are tough Dominican inquisitors. They say, you know what? She's really savvy. I mean, she talks plenty of sense. She's very balanced. There's nothing wrong with her, and she's completely legit. We ask her some theological questions, and man, she knows more about it than we do. Okay, so they let her, the Pope, okay, who was Gregory the 11th, meets with her, and she said, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ has directed me to tell you that you are to return to Rome, and he's also directed me to tell you that he is holding you to the promise that you made the night before you were elected Pope, when in your prayer you told Christ that if you were elected Pope, you would bring the papacy back to Rome. Our Lord is demanding that you fulfill this promise. Well, he never told that to anybody on earth. It was a private prayer that nobody knew except the Pope. And that kind of spooked him, okay? So he starts really seriously thinking about it, and that creates kind of a problem. Okay, she had begun in 1376. She goes to Avignon. She convinces him to go back to Rome. Okay, now the cardinals don't want to go back to Rome. They said Rome, there's rebellions going on. There's bandits all over the hills outside of Rome. People are getting killed. The water is no good. They've got malaria over there. We don't want to go there. In fact, Gregory gets obstacles everywhere. His family really likes, he's a Frenchman, they like their position as being the parents of the Pope. They are like nobility there in southern France. And they say, you're going back to Rome, you're going to go, if you go to Rome, you're going to die there. You're going to, what's going to happen to us? You're supporting us here. In fact, we're not going to allow you to go to Rome. And this is stupid. All your cardinals are telling you you shouldn't go. Okay, so if you're going to go to Rome, you're going to have to go over our bodies, because with typical Latin drama, they lay down in front of the papal entourage, so you're going to have to walk over us. St. Catherine is there and says, do it, go ahead, walk over him. Don't let him stop you. Jesus Christ comes first, okay? So he goes. And meanwhile, there are Italian rebellions that are going on, because again, there's no police force that you could follow. The cop, you call the cops. They are the cops. They're corrupt over there. And meanwhile, so there's all kinds of people seizing things for themselves, Italian rebellions, and the Pope sent a cardinal to go crush it. And the cardinal that he sent was a 30-some-year-old cardinal, again, a guy named Robert of Geneva. A lot of times then, people would go into holy orders, especially in the nobility, because, quite frankly, there was a lot of upward mobility that could be obtained there. And so a lot of times you get people that would be going into holy orders, not because they wanted to pray, because they want to get rich or they want to be a big shot. And Cardinal Robert of Geneva was very much like one of those guys. Very tough guy, very much kind of a businessman, very prepossessing person. Handsome guy. He looked like $1 million. Was used to having his orders followed. And basically he said, hey, if the Pope wants to go back to Rome, and we got to, clean the place out of brigands and stuff, we'll do it. And there's only one language you understand, and that's tough stuff. So I'm going to give them tough stuff, and a lot of people get killed. Meanwhile, there's war in France with the English, so the French don't want the Pope to go because they think the Pope can maybe arbitrate this. But and even there's storms. Okay, gigantic storms start coming up. Gale force, he can't take a ship from Marseille. He's got to go by land, and there's all kinds of snowstorms and sleet and everything. And the cardinals are all saying, "Look at God doesn't want you to go." And Catherine says, "Yes, he does. Don't listen to him. This is just the devil trying to stop you." So he gets back to Rome in 1377. Of course, the people are happy. This is an idealized representation of the Pope coming back to Rome. There's Peter and Paul. So welcoming him back. This is Catherine of Siena, supposedly. The people are happy. This is, by the way, you'd never recognize it now because it's not like this anymore. This is the old St. Peter's Basilica. That's what St. Peter's Basilica looked like before the current one that we had. This is the one that was torn down. But so he goes over, he comes back to Rome. But he's got second thoughts because things are pretty tough in Rome still. And, it's a lot of work to clean up a town that hasn't been managed properly for about 70 years. And the surrounding countryside as well. And the cardinals don't like it there. And not all the cardinals are French, but a lot of the big ones are. They're not happy. They had a lot better in Avignon. Catherine warns him, I know you're getting a lot of pressure, but don't listen to them, okay? This is where you belong. This is God's will. Whenever you go against God's will, you find yourself in trouble. Don't do it. In fact, she said, if you end up, wanting to go back to France, you will never make it. You will die. And he dies. He does die. Okay, and he dies on March 26, 1378. So now we got to elect a new pope. And so the conclave of 1378 takes place. And if you remember the good old show, The Honeymooners, Ralph Cramden would say, Alice, you're a riot. You're a regular riot. Well, this thing actually was a real live riot. There was an uprising outside the conclave. Okay, the cardinals get in to the church. There's no Sistine Chapel yet, okay, but there's another church where they're meeting. And the mob forms outside. And we've seen in the last week, how ugly and disgusting mobs can be, okay? Well, every bit, the mobs are the same no matter what century that you're in. I forget who it was. I think it was H.L. Mencken that said, if you want to know the intelligence of the mob, take the number of people take the IQ of the dumbest person there and divide it by the number of people in the mob, and that's the intelligence of the mob, okay? And this is what's happening. They're screaming and hollering outside. And what are they screaming? We will have a Roman Pope. We don't want, we know that Gregory wanted to go back to Avignon. We don't want that. We want a Roman Pope, or at least an Italian, because we don't want to be left alone. We don't want to be left in anarchy. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome. We want a Roman Pope. It gets so bad that they actually break into the conclave. They actually bust the door down, okay? They come in screaming and hollering. The cardinals have to get the guards to drive them out with difficulty. They're still outside. They're still staying there all night. And so now the search is on. The cardinals will say, what are we going to do? How are we going to shut these guys up? I mean, we got to do something. So they start thinking, all right, we heard them saying that they're going to burn the whole place down if we don't get an Italian pope. Who can we think of that would be good? Okay, if we give them a Frenchman, one of us, it's not going to sell. In fact, what they even tried to do is they even tried to pretend they had elected a pope when they didn't, just to get the mob out of there. But they said that, hey, we got a perfect idea. Robert of Geneva says, I got the perfect guy. Bartolomeo Prignano. Who's he? He's now the Archbishop, at this moment, he's the Archbishop of Bari, okay, down in southern Italy. Bari is the big city that's at the heel of the Italian boot, right above the high heel of the Italian lady boot there. It's the kind of neighbors of my Calabrese, okay? Calabria is the toe of the boot, Bari is the heel of the boot, and he's there. He had all his life been a curial official. He had lived in Avignon, and he was an officious official. He did what he was told. No trouble. Yes, sir, 3 bags full. Whatever you say, very quiet, very obsequious. Yes, Your Eminence. No, Your Eminence. He's not a cardinal. So they said, hey, this is perfect. He won't know what he's doing, okay? He's got to listen to us. He's going to be, he's always done what he's told. He's a quiet guy. He's pretty old now. They'll have their Italian Pope. Guess who'll be pulling the strings right behind us? He's got to rely on us. He's always done that before. So let's elect him as Pope. So they do. He takes the name. They bring him in and they present him and they said, "What name will you be taking? Do you accept the Summum Pontificum?" And he says, "Volo, I will." He takes the name Urban VI, and there he is. Urban VI is crowned, in St. Peter's Square. In St. Peter's Church, and they write back to home, they write back to Avignon, they write back to everywhere. They said, we've got a pope, he's a holy guy, he's a good guy, and we give him our allegiance. However, Urban goes wild, okay? He really does go wild. All those years while he had been at the back of the bus, all those years when we had been bowing and scraping, he was watching, and he saw the bribes that were being passed on. He saw the people making big shots out of themselves. He hated it, and he hated them. And he says, now it's time to straighten things out. No more this little game of footsie that's been going on here. Okay, now you were back in Rome. Now I am the Pope. And there's going to be no more of this, you cardinals thinking that you're the boss, because you're not the boss. I'm the boss now. New sheriff in town, hand in your sidearms, because I'm in charge and I don't want you. And he actually gets, this is not a joke, okay? He actually started, sometimes he'd have what we call today anger management. He did... he did take his mitre, his crozier, and start swinging at some cardinals sometimes. People were, he didn't want any kind of back talk. He called cardinals stupid. He'd say, you're an idiot, and you're a crook, and I'm gonna remove your cardinal's red hat from you. You're gonna be nothing. And all of a sudden, the cardinals said, I think we made a mistake. This guy is wild, okay? And he isn't going to take no for an answer. He's very much aware that he's the Pope, but we've got a very real crisis here. First of all, there is no higher authority in the church on earth than the Pope. I mean, the Pope is judged by God alone. And so there's no such thing as an impeachment. You can't impeach the Pope. I mean, he's there by the will of God. Okay, so you can't, no matter what. I mean, there's no vice Pope. I mean, there's no 25th Amendment. I mean, so what do they have to do? They have to look back on it. So you know what? Maybe this election itself was not valid. Sure, it was an election. Sure, we swore allegiance to him. But maybe the whole thing was because we were afraid. And maybe that fear made us under duress, and therefore it wasn't really a free election. And therefore, maybe the election ought to be voided, because it wasn't real. And so the cardinals said they start meeting, after getting a lot of abuse, and they really did get some, I mean, they had never seen anything like this before. They start meeting together and saying, you know what, I think maybe we got a real problem here that we got to rectify. And so they quietly make a deal among themselves. We're going to go to another city in Italy and have ourselves a little powwow here. We're going to get all of us together, and we're going to ask, we're going to tell the Pope, we want to talk to you at our turf now, in Anagni, and if you're not going to straighten out, we're going to say this election was no good. And so the cardinals, go to a city not too far away from Rome, but not nearby either, 40 or 50 miles away. And they say, we want you, Urban, to come and talk to us. And he says, are you kidding me? You don't tell me what to do. I tell you what to do. If you don't stop it and take this little sewing circle, shut it down, I'm going to excommunicate all of you, okay? And so the cardinal said, okay, well, we all say, so say we all, except one. One said, no, you guys are all wet. But every one of the cardinals but one said, this election was invalid. We're going to need a new election of the Pope. Because now the other one, who could think straight with the mob outside? We were afraid of our lives. A mob broke into the building. We didn't know if we were going to make it through the night. We just did whatever we needed to do to get it out. It's proven that it was wrong because we have this nut, as Pope right now. And so, as alleged Pope. So the cardinals, except one said, no, you guys are all wet. This is 6 months later. You know what I mean? This is not, if you had really been in great fear, you wouldn't have gone and started kissing his hand and kissing his feet the way you did when he was being crowned. So you had plenty of time to think about this. But though they said, okay, no, you're all wet. But the rest of us, so say we all. And they elect Robert of Geneva, the guy that was responsible for the massacres, as the Pope, as their Pope, and he takes the name Pope Clement VII. And here he is. Here's a picture. See? What did I tell you? Good-looking guy. He is. Look at it. There's ice and steel in those eyes. Okay. He's not afraid to step on a few ants if he's got to get to the garden. And he's gonna get involved, and he's gonna get back to Rome himself. So he attacks Rome. He gets an army together, and he said, okay, we all of us come from noble families. We got people that can straighten this thing out. Let's see if Bartolomeo can take it. We'll send an army against Rome. And he also says that, what we'll do, we'll surround them too. Let's talk to the king of Naples. Now remember, Rome, Italy, was broken up into several different states. It wasn't a unified country until 1860. And they, right south of Italy, right south of the Papal States, is what was the Kingdom of Naples, which is the kind of the bottom part of the boot of Italy. And he says, hey, I can give you guys all kinds of deals. You accept me as Pope, and whoever you want as bishop, that's what it'll be. You don't have to worry about what Urban's going to say. I'll appoint bishops with you. And so Naples says, it's a queen that's involved with it. She says, sounds good to me. I'm on your side, Clement. I think you're the right Pope. And but he doesn't make it though, okay, because the Romans are all following Urban, and they get their army together, and also Catherine of Siena gets in there, and she is loaded for bear. She, first of all, meets with the Pope and says, look, Your Holiness, and she, you're a daddy to me. You're a daddy to the whole Christian world. You're a sweet daddy. But you got to start being sweet, okay? Remember, charity is the hallmark of the Christian life, okay? You have to start living charity or you're going to lose everything, okay? Now, you are the Pope, and I will back you, and I will support you every step of the way, but you can't make it easy for people to rebel against you. You got to, show them that, the Spirit of Christ. So she starts writing letters, okay? Because the Christian world is confused. Robert of Geneva, Clement VII, is sending letters out telling the whole world his version of the story, that this has been, they were in fear for their lives. This was an invalid election. Now he's been validly elected, according to him, by the same cardinals. The one guy that refused to go along with them died conveniently or not. He was old. But the rest of them, say, that's right, what Clement VII says, he's the true pope. And the various countries are worried. But Catherine writes to the different countries, as only she can do, meets with representatives, meets with ambassadors in Rome, and she convinces England, to stay with Urban. She convinces the Holy Roman Emperor to stay with Urban. She convinces a lot of the northern Italian states to stay with Urban. She convinces Portugal to stay with Urban. And she tries to, keep him under control, and that's not easy. But she does her best. She writes to the nations. All right, and shows you how the map is divided within a couple of years of this crisis. Here's France, and also the Christian Spanish kingdoms are going with the anti-pope. France's ally Scotland is also with Clement VII. So you got, on this side of the British Isle, you've got urbanists. On this side, you got Clementines. In Scotland, you got Clementines. Naples, at this point in the game, is for Clement. Hungary and Austria are for Urban. The Teutonic Knights are for Urban. The Scandinavia is for Urban, but a lot of some of the German principalities are not. Okay, they're not clear at this stage of the game. Either they're neutral or they're divided. The French part of Switzerland originally goes for Clement, and so you got a really difficult situation, and you have two complete Roman curias set up in Avignon and in Rome. Each group creates their own cardinals. Urban makes himself a whole new set of cardinals. Clement's got, keeps his cardinals full. And they're looking for an opportunity. Clement's looking for an opportunity to reinvade Rome again. The King of France decides that, he's on Clement's side, and you got the whole Christian world divided. St. Catherine dies a couple of years after all this starts. And she leaves a testimony to Urban, pouring her heart out and trying as best she can with all the fiery love that's in her to get him to stop being so hung up on his own prestige and his the insults that he's receiving, and to worry more about being a successor of Peter and a follower of Christ. And she leaves in that testimony, but it's thanks to Clement that Urban was able to maintain the countries that he was. All right, now Clement's got a champion. Okay, St. Vincent Ferrer. Okay, he's really something too. Okay. He is a miracle man. Okay, he is a prodigy in so many ways. For example, he could come to a city in Spain and challenge anyone to a debate. All right, challenge the rabbi, to a debate. The rabbi said, "Sure, I'll talk with you." And he'd have a debate with the rabbi, and the rabbi would convert to Catholicism, and all his congregation would convert to Catholicism. 20,000 people. Okay. He'd do that all over the place. He had a gigantic gift of speech. He had, indeed, it's reported to be, he only spoke the language of Valencia, the area that he was from, but somehow people had the ability to understand him whatever country he was in. I mean, he had to kind of get to something. He was always a hero in Spain and France. And one of the cardinals, who was one of the Avignon cardinals, who was for Clement VII, was a famous guy named Pedro de Luna, and he was a friend of his. And Pedro presented his version of the story to Vincent. He said, "That makes sense to me. I don't think that was a valid election. I will, I'll back you as the Pope." Now the schism intensifies. It doesn't get better. The original people involved both die. First, Urban dies. And they thought, hey, maybe we'll get a way out here, but his cardinals immediately elect another guy. And then after a little while, Clement VII, Robert of Geneva, dies, and his cardinals elect somebody else too. Who do they elect? Pedro de Luna. So Pedro de Luna takes the name Benedict XIII. Someone wrote a book a number of years ago studying Pedro de Luna, and they called it A Study in Obstinacy. No matter what, he loved the idea that he was Pope. He wasn't going to back off for love or money or faith. I mean, he was going to hold on to this no matter what. He was one of the original cardinals. He was absolutely implacable. There's a saying that there's nobody more stubborn than an Aragonese. Okay, this guy was an Aragonese. Now, the Calabres would challenge them on that. Okay, and he's also a friend and admirer of St. Vincent. You know, he knew a good man when he saw him there. He has Vincent, offers Vincent the red hat of the cardinal, and Vincent says, no, I don't want to be a cardinal. There's too much trouble in the church. I don't want to perpetuate it. He said, well, will you be in charge? Will you be my penitentiary? Will you be the guy in charge of, penances for people and, my spiritual director and confessor? He says, yes, I will. Now, there's efforts at reunion, because this is going on. There are 4 popes that are elected and re-elected, in Rome, and only 2 in Avignon. So, this is a very serious problem throughout the church. Sometimes different countries would go back and forth, playing off one pope against another, to try to jockey for position, the ruler, just the way that Clement did with Naples. Well, Naples went back and forth a few times. Okay, Naples ended up being in the Roman column. So finally, scholars and people concerned on both sides start proposing ways out of this. Here's the best way. The via cessionis, the way of cession. Why don't you both quit? Quit at once, okay, and then let the cardinals of both sides get together and elect a pope. The way via compromise, okay, if you don't want to do that, why don't the 2 of you each delegate? It's like mediation. Delegate your powers, your authority to a mediator, and let the mediator then decide how this ought to be approached. And maybe you have a 3rd pope. Or the via conciliaris, call a council. Let's get an ecumenical council together with everybody involved and let them kind of sort this thing out. And the problem with all of this is both sides are opposed to all 3, okay? Both Rome and Avignon say, no, I'm not quitting. Oh, no, you first, okay? I'll quit if you quit, but you got to go first, okay? And but nobody wants to go first, especially when you're dealing with Benedict XIII, because they know how tough he is. The Roman Pope may quit, and then Benedict says, well, I'm the only Pope now, so everybody should listen to me. This guy quit, so I'm what's left? And they don't trust each other at all. You can't really call a council unless it's approved by the Pope. So if neither one of them want to call a council, you're in trouble. So the thing lasts and lasts and lasts. And meanwhile, all kinds of things happen. There are various attempts I'll go back a little bit. There are various attempts to try to reach out to people. The Roman Pope, finally, Gregory XII, he was a Venetian, makes a very heartfelt offer to Benedict XIII, Pedro de Luna, and he says, look, I'll do anything to stop this. I mean, the church is really suffering because of this. You're in trouble too. I mean, France has already pulled out from you once. They're talking about pulling out from you again. I mean, this is no good for anybody. I'll come and talk to you. We'll meet at a ground of your choosing, not in Avignon, okay, but anywhere else. And I'll ride a fishing boat to get to you. I'll do whatever it takes. And Pedro, also known as Benedict, writes back and says, okay, let's meet somewhere in northern Italy, okay, neutral ground, okay, somewhere around Genoa. It's right on the borderline between the 2 jurisdictions here. And we'll talk about it. But they actually get within 40 miles of each other, and each one of them is taking their sweet time, and it breaks down. None of them has enough trust for the other one, especially when Gregory discovers that Benedict had been plotting with the now king of Naples to send an army up to Rome to seize Rome while Gregory is going to negotiate with Benedict. So that breaks all trust down. And so finally, even both popes, so to speak, are 40 miles apart from each other. Both have cardinals around them. Some of the cardinals decide to take the law into their own hands. Cardinals from both jurisdictions leave their popes. They meet by themselves, and they said, let's call ourselves a council. These popes won't do it. let's call a council to meet in Pisa to decide this whole thing, because obviously these popes, are never going to make a deal. And so a lot of people from both sides, and including from the University of Paris, come to this, what I call the Wildcat Council of Pisa in 1409. And they summon both popes to come, but they said, we're not coming, we think it's a trap, but we'll send some representatives, okay, to state our positions, but this council is totally improper. This council is totally without authority, because it's not approved by either pope, so it's nothing. It's just a rump session, and each pope calls his own council, okay. Benedict calls a council in southern France to meet. He gets quite a number of people to come from his jurisdiction. And Gregory calls a number of people outside of Rome to come. And they all three meet. But this Wildcat Council of people has the most. And it's led by people who are concerned on both sides. And there's one guy who had been the Archbishop of Milan. He's a very interesting person. He was also actually a refugee from what was left of the Byzantine Empire. He had reunited with Rome. He was quite a scholarly guy, and he then did well, in the curia of the Roman popes. And he's the guy who is the president of this council. His name is Peter Philargus, and ultimately the Wildcat Council declares that both popes, because of their obstructionism, because of their lack of concern for the church, had lost the authority to be a successor of Peter, and they were going to elect another pope, and they elect Peter Philargus to be pope, and he takes the name Alexander V, and there he is. Doesn't live very long, doesn't even live a year, and they elect his cardinals, okay, his group, he appointed some himself. He's got another group of cardinals that from both jurisdictions that he took. He takes, he's a kind of, and one of these guys I was talking about before, one of these adventurer clerics, his name is Baldassare Cosa. He takes the name John the 23rd. Okay, this is the original John the 23rd. Now, Saint John the 23rd, of course, is not this man. We saw his feast day today. Yeah. But this is, and you can see that guy doesn't look like Pope John the 23rd at all. Okay, again, there's that kind of tough guy, mean streak, and it's unlike, lovable Papa John. But this guy, though, knows the weight of a lira, and he knows how much gold is worth per ounce. I mean, he starts getting involved with all kinds of stuff because he knows money is power, and power is what he wants. He starts kind of selling off church offices. He says, hey, since I'm the Pope now, you tell me what you want, and it's kind of pay to play, and I will, I'll get it for you. And so he starts appointing bishops, and he starts talking to secular potentates too, and he actually is able to drive Gregory out of Rome, and John the 23rd occupies Rome, takes over St. Peter's. So now we've got a situation where we not only have two popes, we got three. Okay, probably the biggest number are following John the 23rd, but John the 23rd is a pretty bad actor. Okay, he's very sharp. He knows how to bribe people. He knows how to take bribes. He knows what power is all about. But what kind of people is he going to get following him? Not too good, okay? And meanwhile, the obstinacy of Benedict XIII is becoming more and more obvious to everybody. He's down to just a couple of countries that are backing him now, okay? Aragon, okay, and also Scotland. That's about it, okay? And poor old Gregory has only a couple of countries, a couple of Italian city-states, backing him. Each week, more people seem to be leaving. But on the other hand, he's being protected by this guy, Carlo Malatesta. Okay, Malatesta in Italian means bad head, but he ought to be called Carlo Buonatesta. Okay, and you can see he's kind of a Sir Galahad kind of looking type guy. he's a very devout Catholic. He says, he says, hey, if Gregory's the Pope, nobody other than Gregory or God, can take him out. Even if I'm the only person following him, I'm going to make sure that he's protected. He's a condottiere. Okay, he's a military strongman. Okay, he protects his. This is the time of the early Renaissance in Italy. There's a lot of strongmen that are kind of ruling their own territories, and with the sword and with gunpowder, and fight hard and fight strong. And he's definitely one of those. He goes, "Don't worry, Holy Father, I'll protect you to the bitter end." Well, they decide to call a council in Constance. Okay, and this is precipitated by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund. Okay, he says, "Look, I was on Gregory's side, but I think there's something that's got to be done to bring the church back together. I really want to see this happen, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get representatives of all three parts of the church here, and I want you, John the 23rd, to call this council, and I will call it as well, but I want to have everybody here, everybody come to work this thing out, and also not just to work this out. Let's start looking at the problems that are in the church, okay, and start, trying to see what we can do to reform them." So Benedict says, "I'm not coming. I'm the Pope, and you can't do anything about it. I don't care what you say. I don't care what anybody says. I'm the Pope by the grace of God, and that's it." And John the 23rd comes, but all of a sudden at this council, people start finding out, there's a lot of, since there's representatives of, all three jurisdictions here, a lot of his bad acts are being discovered. There's dossiers, okay, about guys that have been taking bribes, guys that have been, bought their way into bishoprics and stuff like that, money paid directly to Casa. And, it's looking kind of bad for him. And Casa's starting to get a little scared that, maybe they're onto him. And he then says, "You know what, I will resign, if necessary, but I'm getting very uncomfortable here." Well, ultimately, our friend Malatesta comes in with a brief from Pope Gregory XII. And he says, here is what the Holy Father says. First of all, as the best theologians among you could be able to say, this council has no validity whatsoever unless it's called by the actual Pope. Now, I'm going to read to you a bull with the insignia of Pope Gregory XII. This bull constitutes me as his representative with all powers to make deals. And he gave me the ability to offer a solution to this entire crisis. And here's what it is. You all must acknowledge Gregory as Pope. If you acknowledge Gregory as Pope, you will accept from him a convocation of this council. So from that moment, this council will become a legitimate ecumenical council called by the Pope of Rome, okay, even though he's not in Rome. He will also resign immediately after you do that. But he will not resign, and he will have nothing to do with this unless you accept him as the Pope and allow him to convoke this council. So they said, now what do we do? Okay, this is a real curveball, okay? Most of the delegates here think that John is probably the Pope, okay, because he was done by this Wildcat Council. And we got diehards here from both sides, but what the heck, you know? John isn't long for this world. I mean, he looks like he's going to bolt any minute, okay, because we've seen his shenanigans, okay, and we know he's crooked, so he's not going to make it. Gregory is willing to resign, and who cares about Benedict? We can deal with him later because we're probably going to have to take him out feet first, okay? He's probably going to have to die before anything happens, so that drops out. let's do it. Okay, it's actually July 4th of that year, July 4th, 1415. He decides, they decide, yes, okay, we say Gregory is the Pope. We allow Gregory to set the rules for this, through his delegates, set the rules for this convocation, and we let him call the council. And so they do it. Solemnly they do it. They ring the church bells, and then Carlo Malatesta says, now here is the resignation from Pope Gregory. He resigns the chair of Peter. And he's allowing the solution that you have proposed, that the countries will vote by nations, by country. Each country is defined widely, given one vote each, and when the majority of the countries decide on a candidate for the next pope, he will be the pope. So Gregory resigns, and the council says, well, we'll let you be Bishop of Porto, okay, for the rest of your life. His life only lasts a couple more years. The council goes about its business. Part of the business is trying to convince first part of business is John the 23rd, so-called, okay, tries to flee the council because he knows they've got the goods on him. They capture him, ultimately, and they said, this guy is no good. He's obviously was a crook from the word go. We're throwing him out. Okay, so and most of us think some of us think he wasn't Pope anyway, so he's out. So we're deposing him. And then as far as Benedict is concerned, we'll give him a shot, but whether he's got a shot or not, we don't think we're not going to worry about him. His group is going to die out. And so what they do then is Gregory dies, I think, in March of 1417. A month later then, the Council of Constance runs a papal election, and they elect a new guy. An Italian cardinal. He had been a cardinal under Gregory XII, from the famous Colonna family. The Colonna family is noted for its service to the popes over the centuries. He takes the name Martin V, and Benedict ends up dying. Okay, he's down to one island off the coast of Spain that is acknowledging him as Pope. His cardinal, there's 2 or 3 cardinals left. They elect their successor, but that successor throws in the towel. He says, hey, who's kidding who? I mean, I give up. I resign. Okay, so everybody accepts Martin as the undisputed Pope. And so the church once again, and Martin goes back to Rome, and the church enters into the time of the Renaissance. Well, what are the lessons that we learn from this schism? 1, Peter's throne is eternal and cannot be overthrown, even by Peter's own inadequacy. So even if you got a wild man as Pope, okay, even if you got a guy who's kind of nutty, as a Pope, or who's not doing the right thing, okay, Peter's throne is going to abide, okay, even if the cardinals are against you, even if everybody's against you, okay, ultimately, the constitution of the church is set by its divine founder. It's going to be there. It's going to last. Now, on the other hand, okay, Peter's defects do affect the entire church. I mean, Peter's got the most important vocation in the church. He's the principle of unity for the church. If Peter is deficient, the entire church suffers. So, like the old saying goes, if someone steps on your foot, the head complains. Okay, you hit the head, and the whole body complains. Okay, and so Urban's wildness. The stubbornness, the mistakes that the various successors made did make serious effects on the church. So much so that people. One of the reasons why they call these councils, because a lot of people were starting to say, "Do we even need a pope at all? Isn't this more trouble than it's worth?" Okay, and so the good shepherd will gather his flock. God will intervene. We saw God doing that here, with St. Bridget, with St. Catherine, and others. Even though if it takes time, the gates of hell will not prevail. Now, there's another lesson I think that's very important here, and that is it's very easy to look at it at such a high level. Okay, start thinking about all these popes and who's really popes and who's not pope, that we can say, we can miss the forest for the trees. Okay, what was really going on that was really helping the church in various ways were the lives of holiness that were going on in the people who really were holy. I mean, look at what little old St. Catherine did. She's not a bishop, obviously. She's not a priest, obviously. She's not even a nun, okay? But her holiness was such that it impacted people, convinced the popes to go back to Rome. It humanized, at least temporarily, Pope Urban. It got England and the Holy Roman Empire into the church. And Vincent, okay, even though he was on the wrong side, okay, he's converting people during all this time. Interesting thing, two stories I want to tell about each of those because they're important to this little section. At one point, with all this trouble going on, with the dispute, cities being divided as to which pope they should support, riots breaking out. One time when Catherine, during this time, was in Florence, a mob breaks in to the area where she was, the hospital where she was helping people, and they start screaming and hollering just like these mobs do. Where is that woman? We got to teach this woman a lesson. We got to eliminate this woman who's so much trouble. The woman is Catherine. The other people tell Catherine, they're after you. I mean, you better leave. Oh, no. Oh, I'm not leaving. She goes with a big smile on her face. She says, I'm the one you're looking for. She kneels down in front of the maniac guy with a knife in his hand and says, do whatever you want to do. If you want to kill me, go ahead and kill me, but just let all these other people go. These are sick people. These are innocent people. Let them go. The guy takes one look at Catherine. He looks at those big eyes of hers and he runs off. He's afraid. Okay. Catherine says, gee, I was ready to lay down my life for God. I thought that my spouse was going to take me, but I guess not. Okay, but I still was willing to do it. Okay, Catherine's love was able even to stop a mob. Okay, and Vincent. Okay, at one point, okay, when all this pressure is on Benedict to listen to reason, and everybody else thinks we ought to drop the whole thing and start all over again. Let the apostolic succession proceed. Why don't you give up your claim to the Pope? He's not listening to anybody. Okay, and so one time he said, I want to have with this council that I'm calling, I want to have the best preacher in the entire western part of the church where I reside here preach. I want St. Vincent to preach. And so Vincent gets up there, and meanwhile, remember, he had been Benedict's friend, he had been Benedict's father confessor, the whole bit, and Vincent says, Benedict, you should resign. Look what you're doing. Stop this hard-headed nonsense. Listen to your master, who is Jesus Christ. Look at his body, which is filled with wounds, and do the right thing. Think of the church and not yourself. Do what is needed for the church. And of course, that breaks, the place ends in pandemonium. I mean, Benedict thought that Vincent was going to say, boys, let's get behind Benedict. And instead they say, Benedict, look into your own soul and straighten it out. And, Benedict loses. That's when he got down to one country left, okay? Because they said, hey, if Vincent Ferrer is not even for this guy, then why should we be for him? And Vincent, ends up living the rest of his life, okay, continuing to do the apostolate, the good things, and everything that he was doing before. The real motor of the church is always the holiness of its members. This person whose success as a Catholic is not necessarily a pope or an archbishop. The person whose success as a Catholic is a person who's a saint. The saints are the ones that make Christ visible. The saints are the ones that make Christ come alive again in our own time and place. The saints keep the church strong. The saints inspire more charity, more love. And that, even with, we had this tremendous confusion, with true, canonized, remarkable, miracle-working saints on each side of this dispute, they still, each of them, were loyal to their ultimate master and following him where they could see clearly what his will was to be done. Where these things were, they were following the true, the defined faith and morals of the church, continuing to follow those. They nevertheless, in each of their areas, St. Catherine throughout northern and central Italy, St. Vincent, and especially in Spain and also in France, stimulated a group of spiritual revivals, okay, that survived even the mess that was in the church, and ended up in those areas becoming the focus of a new birth of Christianity, a new birth of Catholic fervor in those areas. And I think there's a lot to be said for us in that. Okay, well, I guess that's it. Well, thanks a lot for coming, folks. And next week, we will be talking about the crisis of the 16th century. And once again, the church is beleaguered on all sides, while entire countries are not only breaking away from allegiance to the papacy, but breaking away from belief in the Catholic catechism, throughout Northern Europe, along the Mediterranean, a gigantic invasion force of Turks are coming, vowing to take over the new St. Peter's Basilica and make it into a mosque. So we'll hear about the crisis of the 16th century and Luther and the next week. Well, see, when I say it's next week, is that crisis. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about the individual heresy movements as such, because it would take too much time. I mean, to cover the entire 16th century in 1 hour, can't do it. Okay, so but I'm going to talk about the effects of the whole thing and how the church got out of it. All right. Well, again, thanks for coming, and maybe see you next week.